Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another Teach Kevin Your Things session. In today's session, we're having Jens teach me Wundergraph. So let's get right to it. Hi, Jens.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So before we get started fully, can we have so can you tell us who you are, what you've been doing before, and what you currently do?
Yeah, I'm Jens. I'm 30, 34, almost 35. I'm father of two kids, 1 and 3. And yeah, I'm in the IT for, I don't know, 10 years or so, and I've been in various roles. I was an Android developer, iOS developer. Then I developed web applications, learned about React, built full stack apps, then transitioned into backend development. And over time, I evolved into being an engineering manager, managing teams. And I saw some recurring patterns there. And then I got more and more interested into the topic of APIs. And I learned a lot about API management and API management companies, API gateways, all this kind of stuff. And so I worked, I think, roughly 2 years for an API management company called Tyke, where I learned a lot of stuff about managing APIs at scale in large enterprises. And we created a lot of tooling for GraphQL. So I was a pioneer there, solving many GraphQL problems in the API management space, and also leveraging GraphQL to integrate APIs, because GraphQL is especially interesting when you can put many different APIs of different shape, protocol, and communication systems under the umbrella of one single GraphQL API. So you make it a lot easier to combine that. And so, yeah, I got more and more interested in this topic. And then I started building my own company, Wundergraph. I started this as an open source project on the side and eventually turned it into a company. And yeah, here we are.
Nice. Wow, seems you have a lot of experience with API management and gateways and all that. That's super good. So, what is Wondergraph? That's my next question.
It's a different question because
Hmm.
um, when you look at traditional API management, it always solves a little piece of the whole puzzle, and you need to put together so many tools to actually get going. If you look into the traditional API management market, what people usually advise you to do is you have backend developers, they develop a backend and then they deploy it, and you have monitoring and everything, and then now the service is deployed. Now you need to secure it. So you
Hmm.
put an API gateway in front and you plug in your API, and it's the same API, but now it's secured.
Okay.
And then comes the front end where you build like a Next.js app or something, and you can connect that to your API gateway. API gateway makes everything secure, etc., etc., and that connects. And what happens is that you don't just have like one API or one database or one thing, but you have many APIs. So you actually have many different backend services. You put an API gateway in front, then you might want to take those services and put them into like an API catalog so people can explore those APIs. Then the front end developers go to the catalog, pick the APIs they want, and build integrations in their front end.
Hmm.
And if you want to build something like that on your own, you will realize you actually need a really big team to accomplish all of that. And the problem here is that you have so many different problems to solve on different layers. Putting it all together is extremely hard. It needs so much experience, so much knowledge, so many different roles involved, like an ops person. You need the backend developer. You need someone with experience with API gateways. You need to set it all up. combine it all together. And with Wundergraph, I was thinking, can we not combine backend development, API integrations, some parts of an API gateway, and exposing that in a type safe way all up until into the front end? Can we put all of that together in one single framework? And
Oh.
that's exactly what Wundergraph does. And what is revolutionary about our approaches, or revolutionary, or just the USP, if you want to compare us to other tooling, the big difference is most tools that build an API, they assume that you create a function and that function will talk to a database, or it will talk to something, but you will implement it yourself. So all of these frameworks, they are optimized to build 100% custom logic. And Wundergraph starts at a different place. Wundergraph assumes that you want to integrate APIs, because nowadays, when you build a startup or you build anything, it's always on top of APIs. Yes, you have a database, but you always need other APIs. So there's like a recurring pattern. We want to use APIs. And what Wundergraph has introduced is the concept of API dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
So in Wundergraph, you can write custom logic, you can connect your database, but you can also add APIs as dependencies. So that means, with npm, you can say npm install express, and it gives you the express package, and now you can create an express service. And in Wundergraph, you can do something very similar with APIs, where you can say introspect some GraphQL API or introspect some Open API spec, and that imports this API into your namespace. And for npm packages, you're like, the way you talk to npm packages, that's by writing TypeScript
Mm-hmm.
or JavaScript. The way to talk to APIs integrated with Wundergraph is by writing GraphQL. So we
Mm-hmm.
combine all your API dependencies into what we call the virtual graph, which is simply a GraphQL schema from your API dependencies. And then you can query that. And we don't expose GraphQL like so many other tools do. Instead, we keep GraphQL completely on the server. So we treat GraphQL more or less like SQL. Like with SQL, you query tables. And the magic about SQL is, with SQL, you simply say what you want, but you don't say how you want it. So you don't have to understand how a table works or how a database works. With GraphQL and Wundergraph, you can query and join data between REST, GraphQL, databases, things like Kafka, gRPC, whatever. We can implement any data source, but you don't have to understand how the engine combines all of that or talks to all of these services. It just translates your GraphQL into whatever it is. And this way, the developer who needs to integrate APIs doesn't need to worry about all the different protocols and how everything works, but simply add your API dependencies, write a query. And as I said, we don't expose GraphQL, we expose JSON RPC. And
Okay.
that gives us many advantages, because GraphQL is inherently problematic when you expose it, because it gives you many different ways of querying the graph.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to limit access to this graph. And if you just expose predefined operations, and we can later have a demo session, if we just expose predefined operations, you don't have that problem. We can optimize everything ahead of time. So Wundergraph does a compile time step, where we
Okay.
compile all operations into very efficient code that makes Wundergraph extremely efficient. And the other benefit is, so you add your API dependencies, you create a GraphQL operation, and that gets turned into an RPC endpoint. This RPC endpoint is specified by a JSON schema. So the input and the output has a JSON schema. With that JSON schema, we can generate any client you want. like a
Mhm.
pure TypeScript client, or we have integrations with React Query and SWR. In the future, we will have other integrations for other languages. We have a Golang client, for example, but we can generate everything because JSON schema, like every language can talk JSON schema. And that means you don't even have to build or do anything to get type safe access in the front end. You just use the generated client. And then, yeah, the story I told at the beginning where you have to build up all these layers, they collapse into one single piece. And it's
Mm.
so easy to manage. And yeah, our focus is really to make a great developer experience, to help people move fast and to not worry too much about all the complexity of the different layers and not worry about managing infra.
Mm. Nice. So I think the because it's not every time we see innovation in the backend space, especially with APIs. And I think I like what you're talking about in the sense that you are exposing RPC to the user or the developers while you use GraphQL sort of like SQL. You don't expose it, and you take care of all the layers, right? The API gateways, making the APIs security. So let's talk a bit about the security part of it. How does that fit in the terms of using Wundergraph?
It's there's different layers,
Okay.
security, but also capabilities. You know,
Mm-hmm.
one of the problems is uh, GraphQL breaks with HTTP.
Yeah.
So, or in general, um, you know, the concepts of the web are when you send a GET request, you want to read something. When you send a POST request, you want to make a change. You want to make a mutation. You want to mutate data.
Mm-hmm.
That's conventions of REST APIs. And when you look at the infrastructure of the web, you have browsers, you have proxies, you have CDNs. They all speak the same language. They all understand these RFCs and these ideas of the web. For example, one brilliant concept is you can send a GET request with a if non match header, and that if non match header it can contain an e tag, and if you have a URL in the browser, a unique URL, and you send this header, there's a contract between browsers and servers. So that means the server answers 304, nothing changed, and
Mm-hmm.
the browser will understand that. And if you go to another URL, make another GET request, and the server answers with an e tag, the client, without you writing any JavaScript, the client will automatically store this e tag and attach it to the next same request. So there's mechanics in embedded into the internet, more or less,
Yep.
that that give you very powerful features for caching and cache invalidation. And what most people do with GraphQL is they send GraphQL over POST requests. And it's not that you cannot cache POST requests, and there's providers who cache POST requests, but you could also just leverage existing infrastructure. You know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And the same thing is with GraphQL security. So there's companies that now build infrastructure and API gateways and tools to secure GraphQL APIs.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, what most people do with GraphQL is they use GraphQL as an internal API, not an external API. They don't provide GraphQL to third parties. That's very, very few companies. The majority of people who use GraphQL consume it themselves. And there's something special about using your own GraphQL APIs. Because when you deploy your Next.js frontend and it's using GraphQL, the moment you deploy this application, that's a question for you. The moment you deploy Next.js frontend, will you change the queries at runtime after deployment?
Mm, no.
You will not change them, right? They
Yeah.
are hard coded into the JavaScript.
Yes, they are.
You will change the variables,
Mm-hmm.
but you will not change the operation.
Yes, you want.
So why should we expose a dynamic interface if we don't leverage a dynamic
Mm,
interface at runtime?
mm, true.
And there's mechanisms like automatic persisted queries or persisted queries in general, like for example, the relay compiler or relay client uses
Mm-hmm.
that circumvent this. But a lot of people still send GraphQL queries. And that also means like GraphQL queries can be huge.
Mm-hmm.
Why? And so what we do with Wundergraph is while you're developing and you're typing a query, we take that query, run it through a compiler, and for each query we create a REST. No, it's not REST, an
RPC.
RPC endpoint.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we generate a type-safe client that can call RPC endpoints, and it has types for each endpoint,
Mm,
very similar to tRPC.
yeah.
You don't need to send GraphQL. You can just say or tell the server, please call the dragons operation, and the
Okay.
server knows what is behind that. But the
Mm-hmm.
client doesn't need to know. The client just knows there's an RPC endpoint and it knows what data will come back. And that's all information you should expose. Most people don't need to expose GraphQL. Like some company do, like GitHub and Shopify. They will probably not be the ICP for Wundergraph,
Mm-hmm.
but if you're consuming your GraphQL API yourself, so if you have like 100 microservices and you combine them with the GraphQL API gateway, and then you have front ends like Next.js and iOS and Android apps, then you're exactly the use case that we cover.
Interesting. So, I think more or less you're using GraphQL as a sort of an ORM, right? And no, maybe not like in the total sense of an ORM, but it's in your backend, so to speak. Then you expose our PCs, which makes a whole lot of sense. But so now my question now will be, how do you version the APIs?
To the first point, you said
Hmm?
ORM. You could
Yeah.
say
Okay.
ARM
ARM.
because
Okay.
it's an API
Oh,
relational mapper.
okay. Okay. New acronym,
New
folks.
category.
Yeah, new
That's
acronym.
what we will tell that the VCs. It's a new category.
Okay. Makes sense.
Uh, versioning. What exactly would you like to version?
Yeah. So I'm a REST guy, so you know how we version REST APIs. Does that even make sense in the context of um Wondergraph, or you could just update the API backend and you communicate to the front end that the data has changed or something? So how would you handle that?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
versioning is a great is it's a great topic. You
Mm-hmm.
know, um, with REST or in general with any API, the
Mm-hmm.
ideal strategy is that your API never breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And like REST or Graph, some people say that one of the big features of GraphQL is that you don't have to version it,
Mm-hmm.
but actually it's just lacking versioning capabilities. Like
Mm-hmm.
the language doesn't have that.
Yeah.
And the benefit of that, the benefit of not having that feature means GraphQL forces its users to safely evolve their
Mm-hmm.
API. So that means in GraphQL, you are forced to deprecate the field, introduce a new field, make sure nobody is using the deprecated field anymore, and then remove the deprecated field.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually the same thing like you should do with the REST API. You can introduce a new version, and I think Stripe, for example, they have hundreds of versions
Mm-hmm.
probably, and they
Mm-hmm.
maintain a lot of them. Um, and like the distinction here is
Sorry,
Wundergraph
go ahead.
speaks GraphQL to the origin,
Mm-hmm.
but to the downstream, so to the client, each operation is a unique URL. So if you want to version an endpoint, you can create a directory, call it v2, and in
Mm-hmm.
that directory you can create new endpoints. But
Okay.
ideally, you can safely evolve your API, meaning uh, you only add stuff, you don't remove or rename anything, and then you can evolve your API easily.
Nice. Cool, cool. That makes a whole lot of sense. So I'm eager to see how this plays out in like a demo to see how we could take to build an API in Wondergraph. So do you think we're good enough to get started on that?
You know what? I just moved the screen to the other
Okay.
side.
Okay. Do you want me to share your screen now?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, sure. There, here we are.
Okay, you can see that properly.
Yeah, I can. Okay, much better.
I try
So
to make it as big as possible.
yes, please.
Okay.
Mhm,
So one thing you have to understand with WonderGraph is the way it's configured. So over over the course of my career, I learned various
mhm,
ways of configuration.
mhm,
You can configure with JSON, you can configure with YAML, TOML, and other things. And then there are some companies that build dashboards for configuration.
mhm,
And uh, the problem with JSON or YAML or whatever it is, those configuration types are not type safe, and they cannot really contain information about what you can do. So if you look at this, for example, introspect a GraphQL API by using this URL, and we put it into an API namespace.
mhm,
And we have also some other configuration options, like we could load a schema from a string, or we could configure authentication, or change the URL for subscriptions, or some other things. If we were using YAML, for example, I would have to go to some documentation and figure out how this works.
yes.
It's not very intuitive.
Mhm,
The
and
other way is if you have a dashboard in the cloud, like like a Cloudflare dashboard or something else, and that's the only way to configure stuff, it means that you have to build a whole lot of tooling for versioning on top of that, because you want to understand, okay, how did my config look like yesterday?
mhm,
What was the change that broke production this morning? And the easiest way to accomplish that is if your config is in Git, and each Git commit, you can see what was the change. You have the change log automatically. And so these were learnings that we took, and they influenced the design of Wundergraph. So in Wundergraph, everything is configured with our TypeScript SDK.
mhm,
I think TypeScript is kind of becoming the standard for infrastructure as code,
mhm,
or configuring infrastructure through code. And so what we're doing here is we introspect the GraphQL API, we put it into an API namespace called SpaceX, and
mhm,
then we add it to our APIs. We configure some code generation, CORS, and that's not important. So it's a very basic config. And uh, yeah, that's what I said before. We
mhm,
have code generation embedded. And maybe one important thing, and this is something, if you build a homegrown solution, integrating APIs on day one, it sounds simple, it sounds easy. And if you go to like day 30 or day 45, what you realize is when you start integrating APIs with GraphQL,
Mm-hmm.
eventually they will collide because two APIs, like the SpaceX API has type user, and then I don't know, Stripe API has a user as well. If you put them into the same API, into the same GraphQL API, those types would collide and it would be unclear what is what. So
Okay.
what Wundergraph allows you to automatically do is we can apply
Namespace.
a namespace. And if we look at the generated schema here, I zoom it up again
Mm-hmm.
and we search for
Oh,
type
okay.
query, you can see that. So GraphQL has no namespaces by default. So we simply apply a prefix here, but
Mm-hmm.
everything from the SpaceX API, it's now prefixed with that. If we add any number of APIs and put each in a different namespace, no collision whatsoever. So that way, you can automatically combine any API you want.
Mm.
If you compare that to other systems, or like my first approach to this was to manually allow the user to rename type user into SpaceX user, and the problem is you really want to make it super easy for people to combine three APIs. If I want to combine three APIs and the result is that I have to rename some things, it just doesn't feel right. And with this solution, any number of APIs can be combined and it never breaks.
Mm. Nice. So this begs the question: did we write the SpaceX API.fly.dev slash GraphQL in this setup right now, or is that like
Yeah,
okay,
that's what the
okay,
user does.
okay? So the user is defining GraphQL, the
Um,
backend guy.
you mean the backend?
Yes.
Well, it can be a third party. It can be
Okay.
our service. It can
Mm-hmm.
be anything.
Okay.
But essentially, this is how you define your API dependencies. And we
Mm-hmm.
have a predefined operation here. It's dragons, and we can make that a bit simpler. I think I have
Okay.
here the terminal to see the changes. It's going to be like too small. I just want to see if everything is fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I said before, this file, so we have file-based routing, similar to Next.js. So we looked at Next.js and like the approach. So
Mm-hmm.
that means if we open our terminal and we do like curl HTTP localhost 9091 operations and then dragons,
Oh.
you can see that we're getting this data. We can also make it pretty with JQ, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the dragons data. And that is the attack surface we're exposing.
Okay.
So we have this whole huge graph where everybody could consume everything, and you
Mm-hmm.
could put a system in place to protect all that, or we can just do this. And
Okay.
now we can do a bit of dangerous stuff. We can add some more APIs and then experiment a bit if you want.
Yeah, sure. So to be sure, the call we just made that was to our RPC, right? Which is file based. Is that true?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So that's like a one sec here. That was the call we were making.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like an API route in Next.js. But what's important to note, all we did is write this query, and now we have an RPC endpoint.
Mm, nice.
So that's a very low code approach. So if you can write a GraphQL query, you
Mm-hmm.
can create secure RPC endpoints. And then you can go all kind of directions. Like we have a few directives you can apply here. For example, you can say, okay, we apply RBAC, and we say you need to match the admin. Okay, I'm going crazy with my keyboard. You need
Yeah,
to
it's
match
okay.
the admin role
Mm-hmm.
And if I do this again, -v, you can see
Okay.
it's
For
unauthorized.
mm-hmm.
So now we applied role-based access to this operation. And obviously, we're currently not logged in.
Mm-hmm.
We could add that.
Okay.
Wundergraph integrates with OpenID Connect, so you
Mm-hmm.
could enable OpenID Connect. I can quickly give you a hint on how to do that. So you could go here and you can say uh, we want to add an authorization section, and then that's just the roles. Authentication, it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Let me center it that you properly see that. We can choose between token and cookie based. So if
Okay.
you're building something for browser based clients, you want to go the cookie based route. If you want to go for a non browser client like a CLI or something, then like we do here, token based will be the right way. And then let me check what is the config. And you see that that's the beauty of not using YAML. It tells
Yeah.
you how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So here's providers, and that's an array. And then we create one provider. And here you can supply a JWKS URL or a JSON, so JSON web key.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an OpenID Connect provider, they supply that out of the box.
Okay.
But you can also use, for example, NextAuth.js, which implements the user info endpoint. And that means you send a token to Wundergraph. Wundergraph takes that token, goes to the user info endpoint. And if we get a user info, so an ID token back, we have the user info, which we can also cache, and then the user is authenticated. So that's a very simple way to integrate with authentication.
Mm. Yeah, that's
Um,
interesting. How much how much of this do I get out of the box if I scaffold a new Wondergraph project?
yeah, give me one sec.
Mm-hmm.
I make a new window here. GitHub, Wundergraph. I make it big enough. Let me know when it's
Yeah, it's
a good
good.
size.
It's good.
Okay, so if you go to our mono repo, so Wundergraph is Apache 2.0 licensed, so it's
Mm-hmm.
just open source. There's no enterprise or any kind of version. It's just Wundergraph. And if you go to the examples, we have an example integrating with Apollo Federation. Here's a config for Auth0. I can quickly show you just the interesting bits, how you configure OpenID Connect. Like here's the cookie based provider, and then you say auth provider OpenID Connect, and you
Mm-hmm.
define your issuer, client ID, and client secret. And then it's done. And what is, if you could memorize for a moment, we gave it the ID auth0, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's our configuration. And now if we look into the pages, and here we have, I think it's index. And you can see we have a hook, use auth.
Mm-hmm.
That's from the generated folder. So that's code generated from Wundergraph.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have this login function. And when you click this button, you
Okay.
click login,
Yeah, I
auth0,
do.
type safe,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the login.
Nice.
So, one way to think about Wundergraph is we're trying to build a similar experience like Firebase, but we're not dictating the components. We're building a framework that allows you to take OpenID Connect, S3, Postgres, MySQL, GraphQL, REST, Kafka, any standardized components
Mm-hmm.
and use this TypeScript SDK like here to define the individual components and put them all together into one coherent framework. So
Mm.
it feels like your own Firebase, but it's your own framework, and you can run it on your laptop.
Nice. That's really good stuff.
Okay, should we build something?
Yeah, let's do that.
Just a
Let's
little thing.
mm-hmm. Let's do the
Because
workflow.
there's one thing I really like. Yeah, then we see the workflow. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go to our docs and we search cross API joins, so that's one of my favorite things. Like I just like it so much. So we
Mm-hmm.
have two APIs here: weather and countries. Let me just see. Okay, we have SpaceX. So if I copy that, oh, it's way too small. Right? Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah. Okay,
uh,
got it. Mm-hmm.
can we now see it? Yeah. Okay, now we can
Yeah.
see it. So I copy this, a little bit of a kitchen show because I'm too lazy. So now you
Yes.
can see weather. We put it in the weather namespace, countries, and we pass it here to our array of APIs, countries. I save this. If I save this, Wundergraph recognizes that something changed in the config. And if we now check our generated folder and we check out the type query, you can see SpaceX, you can see
Weather. Yeah.
weather,
Mm-hmm.
you can see countries.
Mm.
And now we can build something out of it. So we
Mm.
create a new operation.
Okay.
Um, File, we call it demo GraphQL. And let's make a query. So we get continent.
You have to bump up the font size a bit. Thank you.
Font size
Uh,
again. Sorry.
yes, you know
Ah,
it's a
yeah,
new file. Yeah.
yeah, I keep forgetting it.
Yeah, it's fine.
Countries. Now you can see it, right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Countries. Okay, we want to have a continent from the EU. You see, this is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, it's
CodePilot is too good. CodePilot can
okay.
already autocomplete this. Like you
Yeah,
saw,
yeah.
you know?
Just yeah, it did magic.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, let me check. Okay, that's invalid syntax. What is wrong here?
I do not speak
Country.
GraphQL very well.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
So yeah, we have this country's endpoint,
Mhm.
demo endpoint, sorry.
Okay.
So now if we go to our terminal, and we call our operation, it's demo.
Mhm.
Okay, it gets us something. Let's make it pretty. JQ dot. So let's see what we have. Countries,
Mhm.
and we have all the European countries.
Mm.
Can I apply a filter here? No. Okay, it's too many countries. I don't want to have so many. Let's do something different. We do countries, filter, and let's filter this by code. Can I just put a string here? DE? No, I think it's an object. Equals, and then DE
And you have two
with
columns.
just one column.
Yeah.
Okay, and now,
Mm.
yes, thank you, Copilot.
Yeah. Thank you,
Okay,
Copilot.
formats, and now we should get,
Mm. Interesting.
it's all the states. Did I? Okay,
Yeah.
no states.
You know, states just the name and the code.
And maybe the capital? Yeah, capital is cool.
Okay. Hmm.
Okay, that's a good starting point for my simple demo. I don't want to make it like too crazy. Okay,
Yeah.
you can see we have one API That
Mm-hmm.
gives us Germany and the capital, Berlin. And now
Mm-hmm.
let's say we want to get the weather for Berlin and combine that.
Mm.
So what can we do? Let's define a variable here. That's one thing you can do
Okay.
in GraphQL. So we define the city, which is a string, and we make this internal, which means we now have a placeholder. Normally variables are something that the user can supply. This is
Yeah.
not what we want in this case. We need a
Okay.
placeholder where we can put the capital. So whenever we resolve the capital, what we want to do is we want to put it into this variable. So we say export as city. So that means if we're in line 6, so if we executed line 5 and we're now in line 6,
Mm-hmm.
there's now Berlin in the city variable, and we can leverage that to do some cool stuff. So let's say we can do a join here, and you can see from the type join
That's a fine.
adds a second query into the first query.
Mm-hmm.
And now we can say our weather API get city by name,
Interesting.
the name
The
city,
city.
and is that correct? Yeah, okay.
Mm.
It's funny, a couple of months ago I did
Mhm.
this and Copilot. Okay, temperature. Is there a summary maybe? Yes, summary, icon, description, title.
Mhm.
Let's save this and try it out. So we have Berlin here,
Mhm.
and oh, give me one sec. No, not here. We can say here config and then units metric.
Oh, interesting. Something like that.
One sec. Because I have no clue what 280 is.
Okay, sure. Mm.
And okay, it's quite cold in Berlin currently.
Mhm.
And we have an icon. It's light rain. Title is rain. And the takeaway here is you can combine the two APIs, they have nothing to do with each other. And we can combine them in a lightweight, low
Yeah,
code approach.
interesting.
And so far, we only wrote a little bit of GraphQL.
Mm. Interesting.
And now imagine this whole API was exposed. Like,
Yeah.
what kind of queries could everybody build? But you can see if we try to, like here, I could do one sec. We could say city. We supply an argument equals Berlin, eh, not like this. And then here, or we do one sec, city, Frankfurt. It doesn't work. You cannot supply an argument.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's the lightweight approach. And then if you go further, you can see from the generated code, we generate models. So if I go to the demo response, you can see here we have
Mm.
countries, name, code, capital. Then we have the city, weather, temperature, summary. All of this is generated. We generate for you client components. And you could also customize the whole thing if you feel like, okay, this is not enough. Because there's always an escape hatch where you can say, okay, I need to customize something. And
Mhm.
what was very important for us is everything must be type safe. Like I never want to be in a situation where something might be not type safe and I can actually make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are in the hooks section, so that's our Wundergraph server tier. So here you can extend the server. If we enable auto completion, you can see here's our demo operation, and then you can define various hooks: post resolve, custom resolve, mock resolve. You can mock the whole operation, mutating post resolve. So after we resolved, we can mutate the data, and that's what we want to do now. So here's our arguments, and let me just create the what was the signature. Yeah, here's the hook,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have this function, and we have hook, and we have response, and here's data and everything. So that means we can return uh, da, 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 the data. Is that correct, or no? Just response, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have data, and this has the countries stuff, and that's an array. And here we had name, join in capital. So that means you can dot, dot, dot. Yeah. Uh, Copilot knows exactly what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you remember the name was always Berlin.
Yeah.
And now we return Frankfurt, which is my hometown. So we
Nice.
save this. Now we created a hook,
Yeah.
and here it says Berlin. That's from the weather API, but in the root, it now says Frankfurt because we mutated that piece of data.
Mm-hmm.
So that means you can go super low code and just write some GraphQL to do like 80% of your tasks, create the RPC endpoints and whatnot, generate the clients. And in what we know from our customers, it's this 80%, it's easy. And then comes the hard work, like you deal with an API that needs like one-time authentication tokens, special security, some kind of that stuff. And in all these cases, you always need some kind of customization for an operation or something. And that's what you can do accomplish by adding a hook, and that gives you all the flexibility, escape hatches. So you will always find a fast lane, and you will always find escape hatches in case of, like the one of the hardest parts of API integration is the variety of systems and how people design authentication and all these kinds of things, and everything is a bit different. It's very hard to unify that. So if you're integrating third parties, you always need to write some custom code to fix all those issues. So yeah, that's what you can do with the hooks.
Mm. Interesting. So I have two questions lingering in my mind. First of all, we've been reading from the via RPC and stuff. How do we like maybe write to these APIs? Like maybe want to like create data or something.
That's a good idea. So
Mm-hmm.
mutate GraphQL. So you would do like a, oops, too small. Da, da, da. So you do mutation and okay, give one
Sorry
second.
about sorry about
Do
that.
we have mutations here?
I don't
Type
know.
mutation. No.
No,
Yeah,
we don't
those
have.
two APIs are just read only. But
Uh-huh.
essentially, you create an operation, you write mutation, and then you can mutate stuff. And instead of sending a GET request, and this is where we come back to leveraging the web.
Mm-hmm.
So an RPC like this here, it's a GET request. when you do a curl without defining the HTTP verb, it's just a get.
Mm-hmm.
And mutation in Wundergraph is a post. And that means get requests can automatically be cached by HTTP middlewares, by the browser, by CDNs or proxies, and post requests would not be cached.
Nice.
So
Okay.
it's yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sure thing. So the second question I was going to ask, we've been interacting with GraphQL, and we did say we could do REST. Is it like, so? How would our workflow be like? Are we still going to be writing GraphQL to interface on top of REST, or what's how would that look like?
Yeah, great question.
Mm.
Let me go to an example. I think here we have test app, default, Wundergraph, config TS.
Okay.
It's like, is that big enough?
Yeah,
Uh,
it's perfect.
yes.
Okay.
So you say introspect open API,
Okay.
then you can define the path of an open API JSON or open API YAML,
Mm-hmm.
and we translate it to GraphQL, put it into a namespace, and you can query that
Mm-hmm.
or mutate it, and
Okay.
and and that's it. And Wundergraph translates between the GraphQL layer and the origin layer. And in this case, you can see some additional config, like we have the base URL with so we're actually sending a client-side header from the client to the origin, and that's the configuration. So
Okay.
if you want to add REST APIs, you can do it like this. Here's another REST API. You can add GraphQL Federation, GraphQL API, GraphQL. You can add SQLite,
Mm-hmm.
another SQLite. Yeah, whatever you want.
Mm.
Uh,
Interesting.
Lots of different data sources are supported.
Yeah, but so at the end of the day, we are gonna in the operations folder, everything in there is gonna be GraphQL. Is that it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. That it begs. Okay, so just trying to wrap my head. If you have like a SQLite database or Postgres or REST, how do you parse that so expose it to GraphQL? That's brilliant, really.
Well, we use various tools for Open API. We've built
Mm,
our own tooling
mhm,
to translate Open API into GraphQL, and it's a real
mm,
challenge. For
mhm.
example, currently we're integrating Stripe.
Okay.
Stripe uses dot notation, like I don't know, like foo dot bar as the name for fields.
Oh.
So such naming foo dot bar is not allowed in GraphQL. So you have to do all kinds of things to make that work properly,
Mhm,
uh, like replacing a dot with an underscore and then adding a mapping for the responses.
mhm.
But everything is possible.
Yeah.
For databases like SQLite, for example, behind the scenes, we use the Prisma engine.
Okay.
Prisma can translate GraphQL to SQLite and other
Mhm,
databases, but Prisma doesn't expose a real GraphQL schema. So you need to do some special things.
mm,
And luckily, I've built an open source project over a couple of years. It's written in Go, and it's kind of like a GraphQL compiler.
mhm,
And so my like in terms of Wundergraph, it's more like a hobby now. I just enjoy working on that so much, but because the project is more or less complete. But essentially, it's a GraphQL compiler where you can implement. So the backend is kind of stable, and you can bring your own front end.
mhm.
And what's interesting? Oh no, I mixed it up. The compiler front end is stable, and
Mm-hmm.
the back end you can implement your own. And what that means is you can implement a bunch of interfaces, and this way you can make a new data source available to the compiler. And so for the Prisma data source, for example, so Prisma is our translator between something that's similar to GraphQL and the database.
Mm-hmm.
We put our compiler on top, and this way it becomes workable from the GraphQL side of things. Like there's a few things Prisma doesn't do. For example, Prisma doesn't support variables, so you
Mm-hmm.
can only send inlined variables. So that means our compiler, when it talks to Prisma data source, it takes your variables, it removes fragments, it cleans up operations from things Prisma doesn't understand, and it also inlines the variables. And this way you can use variables, and when we send it to Prisma ahead of time, we compile that into something Prisma actually understands. And that's one of our specialties. We can translate between GraphQL and every kind of system, because we're specialists in changing GraphQL ASTs.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, that makes a whole lot of sense. So yeah, I think you this demo is quite a lot to see what Wundergraph does, and I've really learned a lot, and I see why the approach is really good because you just have these this uniform interface, which is RPC, and you use GraphQL to layer on top of REST, SQLite, Kafka, and of course also GraphQL. So the last question I would have in the context of Wondergraph and getting through RPC is we don't have any way to like pass it query parameters, right? It's just like a static endpoint we get all the time. So for
Oh
example,
no,
okay, we do.
yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's amazing because I was thinking is if we have operations and maybe I want to get let's say I have like a social media client and I want to get like the users with one call, then I get the users with their comments in the other. How would I do that?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a great question.
Yeah.
Uh, ah,
Mm-hmm.
wrong syntax.
Okay, so
So we hard
mhm.
coded
Okay.
DE for Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Now we made it into uh, this code here,
Mm-hmm.
and let me remove this hook. We don't need it anymore. Da, da, da. Okay, demo. Okay, this is internal.
Okay.
Country is external. It's required. And oh wait, I just show you one little detail.
Okay.
Um, we generate a JSON schema
Mm-hmm.
that can actually be. It's a very interesting feature because we built this JSON schema in a standardized format. That's actually JSON schema library.
Mm-hmm.
And what this means is you see demo input, it's an
Mm-hmm.
object
Mm-hmm.
with the property country of type string. Additional properties false, required country. What
Okay.
this means is we have a JSON schema. You could now import JSON schema demo input into your front end
Mm-hmm.
and do input validation.
Mm.
But we also
Nice.
do the input validation on the server. If I now call this demo dash v, you will see we get an error, bad
Mm-hmm.
request, invalid input, property path, invalid value, country value is required.
Okay.
So we can supply country. Country equals DE. And I think I need to put it in single quotes. So now
Mm.
that works again. What's your country code?
That would be NG.
NG
Mm-hmm. Mm. Nice. That's
Nigeria.
yeah, Nigeria. That's right. Oh, cool.
Is
So
it 33 degrees?
I, I if it says it is, that it has to be. It's a bit hot.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
That's warm.
Yes, it is. It is. We are very tropical most of the time.
Okay.
Yeah. So so that's cool. Another thing is, how do you make that? So since you in your GraphQL you said you're expecting the control variable, so that means can I do that in the post body as well, or is it just like a query parameter?
Uh, can you repeat or
Yeah,
rephrase the
like
question?
if I want to pass in the country as a post, like a post request, another get, is that possible?
Ah, you mean in a hook?
So if I call the RPC, can I do like send something in the body and not just a query parameter? So okay, let's say that I want to sign up a user now and I have a username and password.
Yes.
Yes. So how would we handle that with this setup?
Ah, okay.
Yeah, that's what I
So
mean.
yeah, no, good question.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still here in query land. So that's
Mm-hmm.
just a
Yeah.
URL parameter.
Yeah,
If you
definitely.
create a mutation, you
Okay.
send the variables as a JSON.
Oh, okay.
So you
That.
would send country as a JSON field
Mm-hmm.
in a yeah, very simple.
Yeah, that's totally making a lot of sense. That's cool. This is a great way to build APIs. Really, it's really
By the
simplifies
way,
everything. Mm-hmm.
if you go to our docs and you search, is it contracts? No, what was it? Okay, I can search it left.
Mm-hmm.
Architecture, Wundergraph RPC protocol explained.
Okay.
And you can see here the URL structure, the status codes,
Mm-hmm.
queries, mutations. So you have
Okay. Oh yeah,
HTTPS,
that's it.
host name, operations, operation name,
Mm-hmm.
and then the body. We
Mm-hmm.
have automated CSRF protection. So if you
Mm-hmm.
use cookie-based auth, that's automatically handled. We have subscriptions. We have live queries. So if you're interested in learning more about how the protocol works, it is
Mm-hmm.
explained here.
Yeah. So one last thing again. Sorry. So I see we have to access the RPCs under operations. Is that customizable or it always have to be that way?
How do you mean that?
Yeah, so is there a way to have like if like right now we have the domain slash operations then our RPC, right? Is there a
Yeah.
way to have something like to take out the operations or just have like a more custom URL or that's fixed?
You mean like a playground or something?
Let's say if I want to expose my RPCs at maybe dominoskelvin.dev slash
Hmm.
dragons without
Hmm.
the operations, is that doable?
I'm, I'm not like, what
Okay,
do you
yeah.
want to achieve?
No, like I was just thinking if because okay, like sort of like a redirect where I could customize the URL, but it goes to the slash operations slash
Ah,
demos. Yeah, is that
you
possible?
want to customize the URL?
Yes, that is the question. I'm just thinking if it's possible, but it's fine,
Yeah,
really.
yeah. No, out of the box,
Mm-hmm.
not yet, because like
Okay.
nobody really asked for
Yeah.
that or complained about it.
Mm-hmm.
You could use a reverse proxy, obviously, to rewrite the path.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So far,
Yeah,
not enough people complained
yeah, no,
about.
no. It's actually something I saw with I had serverless talk with Jason from Netlify, and there was a way to like map the URL to like a more custom one that it takes out the old default URL path. So like I was just thinking if that's possible, but it's definitely still fine. We could have slash operations and get your RPC. That's fine as well.
obviously, so that shouldn't be a
Mm-hmm.
problem. On the other hand, if you make this fixed, what is very nice is if you go here and you search for like cross API joins,
Mm-hmm.
you can see here example code, example query, and then do we make the operation here? Okay, bad example.
That's fine.
let, let me go.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Let's just take this here.
Mm-hmm.
You have documentation. It says host name operations operation name.
Mm-hmm.
If it's always like that, all the docs they will work.
Okay.
If you
Yeah.
if you can customize something and people will customize it, then they will
Yeah.
ask why is it not working like that, and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
true. That's true. Yeah, sure. So I think we're good in time, and this has been so much fun learning about Wondergraph and how it helps in building and managing APIs, and it's really great. So thank you so much, Jens. Yeah, so thank you so much for showing me Wondergraph. It's really brilliant, and yeah. So where does one go to reach out to you, like to learn more about Wondergraph and also ask you questions?
Yeah, so we have very extensive documentation.
Mm-hmm.
I have some very strong opinions on some things. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, have a look at our blog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's some of the blog posts landed on sites like Hacker News. Was quite interesting the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry.
Sorry about that. Mm.
Um, we also have a Discord community, wundergraph.com/Discord, where you
Mhm.
can chat with us about whatever comes to your mind. I have, like, this is not bragging, but I have three monitors. In the middle, I'm coding. On the right-hand side, I have Slack. On the left
Oh.
monitor, uh, I have Discord. So I always have like one eye on the community, one eye on the
Mm.
company, and yeah,
Yeah. Nice. That's
the third eye in the middle.
yeah, the third I made. That's fun. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So yeah. Do you have any final words so viewers are gonna watch this session later on APIs, Wondergraph, anything you wanna let us know?
Yeah, I think, you know, you might be in a situation where, and this is like me a couple of years ago. Some developers, they are super excited to build stuff from the ground up on their own. You know, and I was this guy. I wanted to build my own Kubernetes cluster. And I also contributed to an Azure project where we could run our own CI system, not pipeline, but CI system on top of Kubernetes. And we
Mhm.
built all of that stuff on our own. And at the end of the day, this had absolutely nothing to do with our business. It was just very interesting.
Yeah.
And
I know.
you know, the same thing applies to APIs and integrating them. Like you might be thinking, hey, you know, Wundergraph, it just gives me some GraphQL over my APIs and then RPC and auth and OpenID Connect and caching. And that's not so hard. I can also add like 5 middlewares to my Express.js. And then you have to think about, okay, why are there some professionals? They worked on a graphical compiler for a couple of years. They've built an API gateway, code generation, all of that, put it together, and most of the stuff works perfectly fine. Obviously, bugs are everywhere. Like,
Mhm.
uh, you know, software is never correct. It's written by humans. Humans
Mhm.
are not so smart.
Mhm.
But if you think about it, a lot of people run into situations where you need to integrate APIs, combine them into something like a backend for front end, make that secure, add caching, integrate it type safely into a client, etc. So a very like many projects will run into exactly these kind of setups. And we have an open source tool.
Mm-hmm.
that takes away so much code from your code base. And I know it's exciting to build your own API gateway and to do everything on your own. But if you mature and you come to a point like me where you build your own business, you know there are so many things that we just want to outsource and not do ourselves. And what I learned, the more senior I got, the more experience I got, it really matters what kind of code you write. Like, what problems are you solving? And the most important bit is you should be writing code that actually has something to do with your secret sauce of your business. Like, I don't know, what's the secret sauce of trouble?
Yeah. So the secret source of trouble is we let you, so we get your request and we do some ETL stuff on it to give you on a dashboard so you could monitor those requests and get to see where they're coming from. Yeah.
Okay, so
Your
you have,
APIs. Mm-hmm.
or you use an ETL framework.
Yeah.
Okay, and in theory, you could build and host your own ETL framework.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we could.
But your customer wouldn't notice.
Yes, would
The
it?
the own the person who would notice is your CFO, because they would see that yeah, there are huge costs. And the thing is, if developers build something themselves, it's
Mm-hmm.
just headcount.
Mm-hmm.
It makes the costs almost invisible, and it's such a big problem. And then only the CFO complains your headcount is so big, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not exactly visible that you have a wrong architecture.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if you buy an ETL tool from a provider, you can see the bill, and everybody complains about the bill. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, what you did is you outsourced something, and the team can focus on the real problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people should strive for. So if you're integrating APIs, if you run into this kind of problems, yeah, I can only say
So,
that, yeah, solve your business problem, and
yeah.
let us do this boring stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So outsource as much as possible and just focus on your core business, which makes a lot of sense. That's why we build services like this. So you the boring stuff, the ceremonies, like I like to call them, the stuff that are not intricate to you making money, but it's really good for you to have, like your infrastructures, and that's why we do serverless, right? Or someone else's server, and you don't just go buy your own server farm. So it's the same reasoning to that. So yeah, that makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense. Yeah, so thank you so much, Jens, and thank you for this session. This was great, Wondergraph. I'm going to put a lot of the information you've given me, the Discord, your Twitter, of course, in the description. So thank you for your time.
thank you, Calvin. Thanks for having me.